So, Kateryna, could you tell us about yourself and your journey to this point where you are today?
Hello, my name is Kateryna Busol, and I'm a Ukrainian lawyer specializing in international law. And I have been practicing law since the beginning of Russia's aggression against my home country, Ukraine. It has been particularly relevant for me to do that because I specialize in conflict-related crimes, the crime of genocide, and also transitional justice, which is the field that helps the society reckon with certain traumatic events, reform itself, and hopefully come to the better and more sustainable future. And for that, I've done some academic work. I've defended my PhD on the protection of cultural heritage in conflict, and also have tried to develop professionally. So I've been a visiting professional to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. And in and for Ukraine, I worked for a couple of years with global rights compliance, advising the Ukrainian government and civil society on documenting and investigating conflict-related crimes. And currently, I am a consultant for the Clooney Foundation for Justice that develops the universal jurisdiction proceedings on crimes allegedly perpetrated amidst Russia's aggression against Ukraine.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kateryna. Could you tell me, what does the Day of International Criminal Justice mean to you?
To me, it's the day of two very important things. First, it is the day of survivors, of very brave people who have been through horrific atrocity crimes, but who have managed to go forward, and many of whom are involved in very impressive advocacy campaigns, calling for the prosecution of atrocity crimes globally in all contexts, calling for reparations, and calling for the attention to something we try to turn away from in our everyday lives, because we don't want to face the reality of atrocity crimes being perpetrated in our home countries or elsewhere. And of course, for me, it's also the day of action, a reminder that we are not a small little islands, that we are very interconnected, and that atrocities committed somewhere could end up affecting ourselves as well. And that is why it's important to act upon them.
Thank you. Could you talk to us about how legal frameworks can be used to respond to the war in Ukraine?
There are three principal legal avenues in terms of criminal justice that could help Ukraine seek justice for enormous atrocities perpetrated against its people and its soil. First, it's of course the prosecutions domestically in the country. Luckily, both the government is standing and the human rights society is so active and have been since the beginning of Russia's aggression, documenting, investigating these crimes, forwarding the information about them to the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. So having these actors who are helping, have been helping, building for years domestic proceedings is very important. And this is the first stream where Ukraine is doing its best to ensure justice for survivors in its domestic criminal justice system. The second avenue, when we speak about the atrocity crimes, and here I mean alleged war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, is the International Criminal Court, which has been investigating the situation in Ukraine since spring 2022, just shortly after the full-scale invasion. And as we know, the International Criminal Court has already issued 2 arrest warrants for 2 alleged quite high-profile perpetrators, President Vladimir Putin and the Russian Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova. And this a third important stream for ensuring justice for Ukrainian survivors in courts are the so-called universal jurisdiction proceedings. These are the proceedings which individual third countries not directly connected with this armed aggression launch in order to ensure justice for the crimes which are so atrocious that they cannot be left unaddressed. And we have the examples of such universal jurisdiction proceedings, successful examples for other contexts, for instance, in Germany concerning the armed conflict and torture in Syria, or for instance, in Germany and other countries concerning the crimes against the Yazidi community, the religious group that has been gravely assaulted by ISIS in Iraq and in other adjacent areas. So there are important examples of using third countries to prosecute atrocity crimes perpetrated elsewhere. And this is an important avenue which Ukraine, as the civil society and the state, and as the unions of survivors, are also trying to activate for the ongoing aggression. And the fourth element, which is not strictly judicial, is the so-called transitional justice process. It's an important framework of different mechanisms that include criminal prosecutions, but are not limited to them. They also include truth-telling, institutional reforms, and very importantly, reparations. And the elaboration of such a meaningful transitional justice policy that provides a holistic support to survivors, medical health care, psychological support, housing. This is something that Ukraine and its society and international partners are also trying to work on now amid the ongoing aggression.
Thank you, Kateryna. How crucial are justice and the rule of law going to be in relation to humanity's survival?
I think these are the principles that we are guided by, and that the ones that we cannot abandon, and the ones that we share as the international community of people. We might have the different variations of the implementation. We take into account our cultural considerations, but they're the basic thresholds, like our dignity, our right to life, our right to work, our right to healthcare, which cannot be abducted by anyone. And also an attempt to subjugate another nation through atrocity crimes and through the war of aggression, it's something so flagrant that it's something that an individual nation and an international community as a whole cannot accept, cannot tolerate. Therefore, these principles are fundamental for our survival as an international community, and that is why we should act upon them when they're being perpetrated not only against us, our own nation or religious or ethnic community, but we should stand by and act upon them when they're being waged against somebody else across the world.
Thank you, Kateryna. Could you give us an example of justice and the rule of law having a profound and inspirational impact in relation to humanity's survival?
There's so many important examples like that. I would refer to two outstanding international lawyers, Hersch Lauterpacht and Raphael Lemkin, who were Jews and Jewish lawyers amid the ongoing World War II, who did not know about the fate of many of their relatives, and who, of course, were gravely disturbed by everything that Nazi Germany was perpetrating at the time. And yet what impresses me so much is that these two lawyers have managed, despite all those horrific events, to transform that anxiety into something proactive, into something productive, and into something helpful. So Hersch Lauterpacht developed the legal concept of crimes against humanity, which has been used during the Nuremberg trial and eventually in international criminal law and international justice to prosecute direct perpetrators and military and political commanders who are committing widespread or systematic attacks on the civilian population through extermination, through murder, torture, and sexual violence. And Raphael Lemkin is the lawyer who developed the legal foundation and the concept of the crime of genocide so that it could eventually be codified in the respective genocide convention, and we could ensure that no attempt to destroy one of the four groups in whole or in such is waged by any other nation. And finally, I would want to also mention Professor Patricia Sellers. She's an international lawyer who has developed a particular emphasis and the prioritization on rape and other forms of sexual violence and the need to investigate and prosecute them in international courts and lead, by example, the domestic prosecution. So Patricia Sellers has been instrumental in ensuring that sexual violence is present in charges and eventually in convictions for the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. So she's been instrumental in accentuating not only this type of crime, but also showing that conflict-related sexual violence affects everybody, not just women, but women, men, non-binary people, and children. And apart from just investigating and prosecuting these crimes, we should take into account how differently it affects different people and how we should take that into account and ensure a more sensitized work with such survivors of this particularly atrocious crime.
Thank you. Inspirational. Amazing. Could you tell us about the British Institute of International and Comparative Law and the important work that you do?
The British Institute of International and Comparative Law, or shortly the BICL, has actually been co-founded by one of the people whom I have mentioned, Professor Hersch Lauterpacht, the author of the concept of crimes against humanity. And currently the Institute, and for years, it has been doing policy-oriented research in many fields of international law. I'm very lucky to work with their Center of International Law and to continue my academic research in relation to the responsibility for international crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. My particular focus with BICL is on looking at transitional justice avenues which Ukraine could use in reckoning with the numerous traumas from the ongoing aggression and becoming stronger. But I'm also looking at how the response to the atrocities perpetrated amidst Russia's aggression could be a catalyst for a larger change in international criminal justice. For instance, for the reform of the regime of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, so that it could prosecute the crime of aggression without the political constraints which it currently bound by because of the certain modalities of the Rome Statute. And thirdly, I'm also looking at the dynamics and ways to help at reparations which could be provided for the survivors of conflict-related sexual violence in Ukraine.
Thank you, Kateryna. What advice would you give to a young person who's thinking of going in to the legal profession?
To any young person who is not even yet thinking about going to the legal profession, I would say that it's just so important to stay aware. We're very interconnected, and being aware and acting, using our voice during the protests or during writing certain manifestos is very important, whatever profession you choose. But as regards law, I would say that it's not the dry field that many people think it is. It's actually something that allows you to use your heart and your mind in harmony to try and help your own community, your own country, and the world as such. It might sound quite ambitious and idealistic, but especially international law, I think it embraces so many cultures and it invites us to feel and to contribute to the larger universal good. And I also strongly believe for the change which is being driven on the ground and which is being driven by the people, and practicing international law, learning from the best practices of your peers across the world, and yet also realizing that you and your community have so much special to share and to contribute. I think it's very rewarding. And also on the final note, I would say that for me as a human being and a professional, a few things have been more rewarding than communicating with survivors of atrocity crimes, learning from them and being inspired by them. Because when I think that something is hard for me, it doesn't work out, I just kind of think the experience that people who have been through lawful detention or torture have been, and they find the drive to help not only themselves, but to inspire the larger policy change in the country, in international law. And I think this is deeply inspiring, the combination of the human and the rational and the desire to contribute to a bigger change for your community, for your nation, and globally.
Amazing, absolutely amazing, Kateryna. Is there anything that individuals can do to support justice and a strong rule of law? And what organisations would you recommend people support?
As I mentioned, staying aware and feeling that we are not only the recipients, but we are co-shapers of the policies and of the ways forward. I think it's very important feeling that we are the subjects and the contributors and the co-shapers. As regards the non-profits, there's so many, but I would refer to one in particular. It's the Global Survivors Fund. I have had the privilege of cooperating with them. And why I admire this organization so much is first because the Global Survivors Fund was established by a survivor, Nadia Murad, who is a Yazidi survivor of conflict-related sexual violence by ISIS. And it was co-established by Dr. Dennis Mukwege, a Congolese doctor who has been treating victims of sexual violence for years. These two exceptional personalities received a Nobel Peace Prize for combating sexual violence as the weapon of war. And what's important is that that not only raised the awareness about this horrific atrocity, but they make a point that helping survivors means not only ensuring qualitative proceedings pursuant to a fair trial and ensuring accountability in the criminal law domain, it's also about providing decent conditions of living. It's also about providing medical support, employment, education opportunities to survivors. So it's about this holistic support of the people that we should be concerned about, whatever field we're working on. So Global Survivors Fund is somebody that I would strongly recommend, at least at looking at their work and considering supporting through internship or volunteering or by other means. But what I would also point out that there's so many important civil society organizations on the ground in each and every country. And I think what we should also do is to look locally and act locally, because it's something that contributes to the change in the bigger picture. So just look at wherever your community, whatever civic initiatives they have, how they work with human rights and contribute there as well.
Kateryna, amazing, absolutely amazing. Okay, thank you so much for talking with me today. It was an absolute pleasure to hear your words. It was so inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you very much.